My name is Christy Gast. I'm with Ensayos, and I'm here today with Randi Nygård in Norway and Caitlin Franzmann in Brisbane, Australia. We are going to talk about the local peatlands where we live. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of our collaboration with Ensayos, and then tell you all about the local peatlands where I live, which is New York State in the northeast of the United States. What you see here is a map of the very southern tip of South America, including the archipelago of Tierra del Fuego, which is the southernmost part of that continent. That's on the right. That map shows some peatland sites. And on the left, you see some scientists in Karukinka Natural Park, which is one of the scientific organizations that we partner with. And they are taking some measurements and studying the plants in peatlands. So with Ensayos, which was founded 10 years ago, what we do is bring together artists, scientists, ecologists, local, ecological, and Indigenous activists to think together about issues that impact Tierra del Fuego and how those issues unfold in other places of the world. Right now, our main area of focus is peatland conservation. Peatlands in Tierra del Fuego are very important in terms of their cultural value and their ability to sequester carbon. Globally, peatlands sequester more carbon from the atmosphere than all other vegetation combined. Peatlands they're profound, they're deep, they're physically deep, they're formed over millennia by the decomposition of vegetal matter, primarily helped out by sphagnum, which is a type of moss. That's what these scientists are standing on. So primarily, I say that peatlands are characterized by the profundity of sphagnum moss, but that's not true everywhere. And I think we'll hear about other kinds of peatlands in Randi and Caitlin's presentations. So here you see a map of the northeastern United States. The polka dotted section on the lower left that says Topogenous peatlands, that is where I'm learning about my local peatlands. And within that polka dotted section, there's a long line that ends a bit to the left. That's the Hudson River. And I'm to the right of that in that narrow strip. What are topogenous peatlands? The peatlands here look very different than those in Tierra del Fuego. One thing that the peatlands have in common here with the ones in Tierra del Fuego is that they are left behind after the glacial retreat. Topogenous refers to peatlands that get water from above. You can see that these topogenous peatlands have water that's flowing into these basins, and these basins were formed by the retreat of glaciers, and they have a certain type of soil underneath that support acidity in the water and also a low nutrient content. These peatlands, they form in different ways. They begin to fill these lakes or depressions, and sometimes they form on the edges, and sometimes they form mats that cover the entire place. So we do have a lot of sphagnum here. Sphagnum creates this acidic condition in which other vegetation like sedges, grasses, conifers, which are trees, pine trees, which when their vegetal matter falls to the ground, it does not fully decompose. And what that forms is peat. So peatland refers to lands of peat. They're formed in different ways. The characteristic is that it's acidic and it holds water very well. That's what peat is as a land. The wetlands where I live have other types of plants as well. They have pitcher plants, a type of carnivorous plant, and it only can grow in places that have a highly acidic soil. So it's very friendly to these sphagnum peat bog landscapes that are nutrient poor. That's why they get their nutrition by eating living things like the insect that you can see stuck to the inside of this pitcher plant. I can't remember the name of this bush, but it's a type of berry that also signifies that a place might be a peatland. What's really interesting is that the types of bogs here have such a variety of what they call physionomic types. So 5 major physionomic vegetation types, which are tall shrub, thicket bogs, dwarf shrub bogs, forests, and moss carpet communities. So when I look at a peatland in Tierra del Fuego, I can see, okay, it's got lots of mounds of sort of reddish, greenish sphagnum with very short bushes on it, no trees growing, and it's very big, and there are little pockets of water in between the lumps. Here, I might be looking at a place that is muddy with a lot of grass. I might be looking at a place that has sphagnum and some bushes, but is much smaller. Or I might be looking at a forest. That makes it challenging to identify what is a peatland here. So here's a really interesting one, Bog Hollow. And the plant on the right is buttonbush, which is a member of one of these communities that can grow in peatlands. So Bog Hollow is a special type of peatland that forms on the side of a stream rather than being one of these depressions where the water comes in only through rain. On the left is a massive big beaver lodge. So the beavers change the water level, which at times can completely inundate the mossy portions on the edges of the valley that the bog goes through, which might impede the growth, slow the growth, or stop the growth of the sphagnum itself. But does that change the rate of development of peat? This is Swift Pond, a circumneutral bog lake, which is a spring-fed calcareous water body that commonly supports vegetation of both acidic bogs and calcareous marshes. So they're super rare habitats. Only certain portions of it have the acidity to be considered a peatland, and those are where you do get floating mats of vegetation and drifting peat rafts. This is another lakeside bog on Thompson Pond. I'm standing on some lumps of sphagnum that have some berry bushes and sedges growing out of them, and they also have a lot of ferns. And here is a tiny salamander that lives inside of the lumps of sphagnum. So Randi, I'm gonna let you share your screen now, and we'll hear from Norway.
Okay, so in Norway, we think that 10% of our landscape are bogs. So you'll find them, in the mountains, in the forests, actually inside the city of Oslo. And we have what I guess it would be reminiscent on what you talked about, Christy, bogs that are fed by rain. So they get more water from rain, and they can then turn into higher bogs, like high bogs, maybe you'd say, where the ground level of the water will be actually above the normal level, meaning that they can actually have you can actually sometimes see it, that they have a rounded top, even if they're quite big. And then you have bogs that will feed on more earth water or groundwater or water coming from streams. And they are much more nutritious, and they will not have the groundwater level rising that easily, as I understood this. But then you have a third kind of bog, which a lot of forces in Norway are now trying to save, because these are the bogs that are disappearing. And it's what you call in Norwegian slåttemyr, which means that people were cutting grass for their animals on these bogs. It's a different kind of ecosystem. You have plants there that you cannot find anywhere else in Norway. So one thinks that this practice of cutting hay or cutting the grass to make hay, maybe you'd say in English, is a really, really old tradition that is not, really few people would practice that today. In these kind of bogs, the sun would enter more easily in, and it would be more photosynthetic. And I think it's also something with being stepped on. And this is the more, like the really red listed kind of bog that we have in Norway. I think it's interesting how the most endangered bog here is one that needs and now lack human interaction. We often think of our Nordic culture as one being turned towards nature. Still, even if all human settlement originally happened near or in wetlands, we now find that in our cities, streams are often in pipes, and that in the countryside, many bogs have disappeared long ago, or also just a few years ago. They've been drained and turned into agricultural land, or they've been filled to build roads. Bogs have been seen as dark and dangerous and mythical places here. And they were, of course, also dangerous. You could actually drown in deep bogs. But people also knew that in addition to provide hay for sheep and cows, the bogs could filter and clean water. They could conserve fish, and they were excellent water supplies in dry periods. They also sucked up rainwater and prevented flooding. And we still know and still use them to pick berries. There are some numbers of berries growing on bogs in Norway. And in winter, bogs and lakes were used as roads. They were open, and as they froze, they were excellent places to go fast from one place to another. If you walk in the forest and you come to a clearing, or a lysning, as we say in Norwegian, an open space in the forest in between the trees, might be a small one or a big one, there's often a bog. Often it's the peat moss that created this. It might have taken it thousands of years. And these clearings are thought to have been places where people would then stop because of the light and the openness. And they would light fire, they'd rest, tell each other stories, maybe wonder about life, and then worship the gods. And to me, this is quite interesting if you think about how it opened up to the light, but how it also was something very deep and dark underneath them. The carbon in the peat is decaying organic matter, consisting mostly of dead old plants, leaves, trees, branches, mosses, of course. And these decomposes extremely slowly. It can take thousands of years for them to be broken down. The bogs are antiseptic and acidic because they lack air. There's really little oxygen coming in, which is needed to decompose something that is dead so that new life can appear. In a way, I think that the bogs are something in between life and death, and sometimes it might be easier to understand what is causing death than to understand what can ignite a life. And today we might not worship gods, but we still tell each other stories. In a wetland center here in Oslo, where there is a bog within the city and also a lake, children are taught about bogs. They're told that bogs are like big balloons containing a lot of water, and that these balloons can breathe because the bog is breathing water. Then I think I should pass the word over to Caitlin Franzmann in Australia.
So I'm in Brisbane, which you can see here. So it's on the east coast of Australia. And I am looking at peatlands that are really unique to subtropical climate and to the coast. So they're sand-based fen peatlands. So I was born and grew up on Kabi Kabi country, which is kind of just north. So it's around this area. And this is called Wallam country, specifically along the coastline. And Wallam is a Kabi Kabi word, which is actually for a plant, a Banksia plant, which characteristically occurs in the Wallam heathlands. And these are plant communities where sandy, acidic and nutrient poor conditions are too tough for forests to get a foothold in. So I just wanted to share with you a bit about what I recently learnt about the Wallam swamps and peatlands of Minjerribah. This is actually Moreton Island here, and Minjerribah is this island here, which they both form part of a bay called Moreton Bay, and it's pretty highly protected area. It's a Ramsar protected, and there's a whole lot of state and national government protections overlaying it as well. So there is recognition of the importance of the wetlands, and yet I've been speaking to scientists and there's still very little studies that have been done specifically on Minjerribah around the wetlands. Minjerribah is the traditional land and sea of the Quandamooka people. Minjerribah, it actually means place of mosquitoes, which actually makes a lot of sense when you enter the swamp and mangrove areas. So the Australian Ensayos pod has been really fortunate to have been welcomed and hosted by Freya Carmichael and her mother Sonia Carmichael, Ngugi women of the Quandamooka people. So Ungair is this reed that is really important to the Quandamooka people. It's a cultural weaving fibre, and it really depends on the health of the wetlands. And so the Carmichaels as a family are really committed to the protection of the fibre and its habitat. So we continue to be guided by their knowledge and feelings for this project. And so for our next trip on the island, we'll also be joined by an ecologist, Renee Rossini, and she's carried out field work and facilitated education programs on the island for over 10 years. So she's got a really strong knowledge of the wetlands, wetlands that are particularly unique to Australia, and she really advocates for many of the endemic plant and animal species that form part of those ecosystems. And so we were recently discussing some of the endemic species, including the endangered yellow swamp orchid, which I don't have an image of, but this is actually quite rare because of loss of habitat over time. But one of its greatest threats today is the illegal collection of the flower heads for cultivation and trade. There are also wetlands dominated by rushes and sedges, including this ungair, and also the peat forming spreading rope rush, which is this one. And so what's interesting about this one is that rather than as with the peatlands in Tierra del Fuego, where sphagnum moss is the sort of key peat forming vegetation, it's actually this spreading rope rush that is the peat forming vegetation on the Minjerribah peatlands. Another plant, which I think is similar across all of our peatlands, is the carnivorous plants, and this one is the sundew. I recently met a palynologist, and that was something that I wanted to share with you. It was a really fascinating meeting. A palynologist is a person who studies pollen fossils, and some key points that he raised, which piqued my curiosity, were the notion of peatlands as botanical and fire archives. Controlled burning in traditional management practices is really important for the health of the ecosystem. Yeah, whilst peat fires are still an issue, they are not as much of an issue. Like, these plants that exist can regenerate, and some actually need fire to thrive. Because he's talking about getting these core samples, and that allows you to look back in time to understand the past environmental changes and also the traditional land management practices. And that just helps to better understand and support the ecosystems today and in the future. And they have core samples that show evidence of continuous peat dating back 27,000 years on the island. So this is one of the swamps called 18 Mile Swamp. It is the longest sand fen in the world. So it's unique in that sense. Even doing field research on this site, we'll have to be quite specific about what areas we wish to look at.